A bit more regarding civilization and some even operational definitions that we didn't specify last time. But civilization, men coming together to collectively do things mentally that they individually cannot do. And along those lines, we could give another real quick definition of civilization, that which is all mental. In case you never thought about it that way, because they speak in the ordinary sense of civilization being all sorts of things, all sorts of agencies, artifacts, institutions, physically, I mean, buildings, commerce, but in a quite real, a more substantial revolutionist view of civilization is that it is all mental. Now, there's no doubt that man becoming civilized, if you want to say that, men becoming civilized / intellectually active, that they do build things. They build TV cameras and they weave clothes. But civilization is, in fact, all mental. The rest of it is the output. The rest of it is side effects. Even when civilization seems to not just build buildings, but that seems to, in fact, have helped construct, to mold human behavior. Notice this. What is it that does it? It's not buildings. It's not artifacts. It's civilization being all mental. That is, it is thinking to control behavior. And ordinarily, it takes on another life of its own when people, even great thinkers, even those who specialize in civilization, go into other descriptions of what it is. And if we took ordinary people, not trying to start an argument between us and ordinary people, because we will lose, which is not the point. But they would say that civilization, and they could begin enumerating quite, to them, quite valid physical realities that civilization is. Not any one thing. I don't mean that an ordinary intellectual person in the city would say that a large cathedral or a physics lab or that a police station or that a poetry department is civilization, but they would point and say this is a part of civilization, that it's these sorts of things that make men behave, that alters their behavior. They're actually being police stations. They're actually being courthouses, prisons, and on the other side of the coin, institutes of higher learning wherein men are encouraged to do better, temples, cathedrals to do so. I'm telling you this for a reason. If you'll start looking, civilization is all mental. And what it amounts to is all of the things I just enumerated on behalf of your local civilization. All of those things are the results of thought already being for the purpose to control behavior. So it's thinking to control behavior. It is secondary world attempting to put the squeeze on the primary world and the kind of juices that fall out. Instead of just laying there, they spring up and they become prisons, colleges, religious institutions. And there's also one more before we really get started that I could say about civilization. Kind of another operational definition. It is men collectively believing and thinking in ways that normally are impossible for the individual, like in the inventions of the extremes, in the inventions of all the institutions. The inventions, for instance, as we were saying last time, of religion and science, and with a slight spin on what we were describing last time, is to put the final little operational definition that civilization, all of the things we just mentioned for the last 5 minutes, all of these things is what civilization is, but it's also what civilization is for. Those of you that are really listening, it's the same thing. We just, since you didn't like it last time, we repackaged it. No, sir. There is no way that verbs are ever going to give birth to nouns. So now on with the show. There is a little something that we mentioned some time back just kind of brought up, but there is a certain unnoted operational aspect of civilization and the secondary world of the intellect. Consider that all one heading. And this operational aspect is a kind of displacement process. It is almost like a removal. It is a set aside. It is a kind of segmentation procedure serving a particular purpose. And what it does is it seems, once you can see it, not to other people, not the ordinary mind, but what it does is seem to remove or to move man a step further from certain primary matters. And we're still talking about civilization, remember. The collective thought / beliefs of men coming together and being civilized, of men coming together and collectively being able to believe / think things that they cannot do individually. But a part of it that is never noticed, and remember, it's operational. We're not here to do some criticism and find fault with what they're doing. It is an operational base of what civilization is, what collective thought and collective belief is. And what it is it takes man's mind, if you will, because we're still talking about the mental world, we're not talking about the physical in the strictest sense. And it takes man and removes him. It segments whatever he's thinking about one step further away from certain primary matters. And in any particular case, it's going to be one step away from a particular primary matter, which is what any aspect of civilization is. For instance, for those of you who might be just seeing this for the first few times, this is in absolutely no wise any critique of religion of any sort. I'm just using it and science as two splendid examples of the operations of civilization in the secondary world of the intellect. Notice that under ordinary affairs, for a man to become an expert in religion, a true expert, we're not questioning it. Out there, he is considered to be an expert. Let's use Christianity to make it simple. All he has to do is become an expert on the Bible. Literally. And it could be, if we was talking about some other religion, some other scripture. That is the collective beliefs of the system. All he's got to do is become an expert on the Bible, and he will be taken to be an absolute, unquestioned, religious maven. No one will question him after that. They're not supposed to. After someone becomes an expert in a secondary manifestation of some initial affair, no question is any longer to ask. He is truly an expert. There is no need for any further evidence, and no one will question him. And to take this example before we move to the other end of religion, a person becomes an expert in religion, the text of their religion. You understand when I say the text in the Bible? There's much more in the Bible. There would be, if you were Catholic, it would be all the teachings, all the canons, all the papal missals. It would be the complete. Now, if they're ordinary religious people, I guess they'd say I was trying to get into the archives and the rules and the etc. of the complete history of the Catholic Church. Yes, but don't look at it as being the work of some man, of Pope Pius somewhere, or don't look at it as being the collective work of just some particular group of cardinals or somebody at one time. You've got to look upon everything that constitutes, let's say, the Catholic Church. Any church, but the Catholic Church. Forget the buildings now. Forget anything tangible. Let's get into the untouchable world, which is what civilization is, what the secondary world is. All of that, from the beginning of the church, everything connected with it, everything that's not connected with it that somebody said was and they denied it is, all of that is the Catholic Church, the civilized Catholic Church. Because all of that is mental. Remember, it's removed from the Bible or whatever they wrote down, that the Pope wrote down. Forget that. We're not talking about the actual writing, although I know they preserve such as that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about what that represents, the thought. That is the civilized church. But what has it done? Somebody becomes an expert in that, in some fashion, that within his own self-referral system. Those who taught him, those who have the right to give you a license to practice Catholicism, to be an expert, they say you're an expert. What's he an expert on? It's not that he's an expert on to stay with the religion. He is not an expert on the nature of God or gods, on the nature of man, on the possible purposes of life. And don't fall. Don't you fall back in the city. Because if you're ordinary minded, you could say, well, that's not true. Because they spend a great deal of their time, ministers, priests, rabbis, discoursing on the nature of life and the nature of God. Oh, really? Oh, I know what you mean. Oh, they'll say, oh, well, like it says here on page so-and-so, or like God told Uncle Hubert 4,000 years ago. Is that what you're talking about? But they don't have to have. No one expects anyone to have, assuming there is such a thing now. Remember, we're just going by what's already set in the city. No one expects the world's greatest expert on religion. In any culture, under any organized religion, no one expects them to have some kind of personal knowledge of the gods or whatever the background of religion is, of the nature of life. Now, the ordinary mind, I repeat one more time, if you're looking like you missed it, could say that's not true, because that's what they're dealing with constantly. In the invisible world of speech, when they're trying to help their parishioners, the followers of the religion, they're continually talking about what God would want you to do and how you should live your life. All right, they're talking about it, but on what basis? On something that they know, on some experience they've had? Don't fall any deeper, because then they say, yes, the experience of going to school and studying the Bible. Civilization. Maybe this is why I didn't stay with it much the first time we brought it up. Part of civilization, literally, if you can think outside 3D, is to take a man's mind, not physically, a man's mind, which is the world of civilization, and move it in any particular way, to move it at least one step further away from what was, in a sense, the primary origins of whatever it is. That's what being civilized is. That's what being an expert is. Is not, if you were an expert in some primary affair, I guess we'll get crude. How about, if you were an expert, if we're going to talk about the primary affairs of sex and sustenance and shelter, if you were truly an expert in sex, or as they call it in the University of Missouri, screwing, if you were an expert on it, a true expert at that level, you would have no book out, you would have nothing to say, you wouldn't answer questions. I mean, somebody come up and wanted to ask you a sexual question, and you are a true expert in assuming that, to the extent I'm inferring, which we're playing with reality, that you're just still back at the level, you're an expert, primary expert on sex, and still literate, which is almost an oxymoron. Well, it's almost an oxymoron, but we got some of us here who are almost. If you were an expert still on a primary matter such as sex and screwing, and somebody did come up and ask you a question and you could literate a little bit, and they wanted to ask you some technical question about the nature of sex, and you were a primary expert, about the best response you'd have is, what are you doing later? That'd be your response. If they wanted to ask about the psychological ramifications of multiple sex partners or such and such, you'd say, you want to screw? That would be the level of your expertise. Well, some of you laughed, but was it the laugh of humor or of learning something? Leave that to a Kyroot. The more you're an expert, And one more time for newer people, it's no attack on the world's experts, religious or otherwise. That's not it. But the more you're an expert, the more you are dealing with secondary matters. That is, which is always, of course, reflections of some primary matter, but you are being civilized. You can't be an expert without being civilized. And the more civilized you are, the more you're dealing in areas that are invisible. I know that you may have to put your hands on building blocks and on clinical records and on books that you're studying some scripture. But the whole affair is taking place here. I mean, if you got any doubt, you can tear down the churches and religion will prevail as soon as somebody's thinking about it, right? You can tear down MIT's physics lab. And if you do not kill the instructors there and the guys doing the work and they wander out, the world of physics, whatever field they were experimenting with at the time, still lives here. But you cannot reverse the process. Go wipe out their mind and leave the building standing. Now you can write me and say, hey, I figured it out. It's here. That is, the rest of it is simply trappings of it. The rest of it is simply the nature of the three-dimensional world. The expert, the more a person's an expert in any field, the more he is civilized, and vice versa. And the more he's civilized, his field of expertise more and more resists here. And it more and more removes the person, not wrongly, but it more and more removes them from what was the primary origins of it, such as I was trying to get you to see by my sexual expert. Well, how about this? No one in the city, unless you're talking about some instantly inconsequential critic within life's own body. Other than that, people in the city, just a general overall view of civilized minds, notice this. They do not hold it against an economist for not being rich. Does that help? It's not just funny, it's not just silly. But those who keep up with the stock market, those who watch Wall Street Week, roller investing, which is I know it's a show you can't pick up around here, but I'll tell you about it sometime. It is simply the nature. Now, Captain Irony could fly in here some low-rent version of him. Man, I know there are people around that do things like that, and they're always, one of the most common one is laughing at Catholics taking sexual advice, marriage counseling from a priest, from a celebrant. People have been doing that. If you think that's funny, that's a pretty dusty laugh that you get, because that's thousands of years old. They're doing it long before the Catholic Church. Boy, what a joke. Getting sexual advice from a guy that supposedly never screws. Give me a break. Notice, that is not the prevailing attitude. Although right quick you can listen, be ye Catholic in their background or not, you can go, well, that's true. That's not just silly. That's unreasonable. Why would I do that? Oh, well, I got to go. And where you may be going is down to the church to get some marriage counseling. Because if it's pointed out, you can go, well, that is a place for a little cynicism, or at least serious questioning. That's silly. No, it's not silly. Not just because one person says so. Notice, the millions and millions of people who are Catholics, millions and millions I'm just still using this as one example. They do not suddenly all go, my goodness, why would I go for personal marriage counseling, or why would I sit here and watch a man wearing a dress who swears that he never gets any, and he's telling us how to live sexually and what God wants people to do sexually. Suddenly you'd have these millions of people going, well, I like the rest of it, and I like all the pomp and the circumstance, and but, well, that's ridiculous. Nobody ever thinks that. That's being civilized. It is being one step away from, in this case, sex. And to be more and more civilized is almost like what I was inferring by a kind of displacement procedure. That it, in a real sense, it moves you further and further away from the primary origins of whatever the field is. An economist, for those of you who have that kind of twisted mind, they're almost as easy to laugh at as priests. And those of you who are really sophisticated, more so. But at any rate, An economist, actually, they don't just spring from nowhere. It is based upon one of the three S's, the sustenance. And so now that most people do not have to go out and pick wild berries every day, that you work and you get paid in barter, you get paid in credits at a bank, and you get paid in money. Now the field of economy, can you see, is to sustenance as a priest or a marriage counselor is to screwing. And people will buy books, they pay all kinds of money to subscribe to these newsletters of economists and people who get up and make speeches, and they go to seminars. It's just a hobby. But notice, all of you laughed, no one stands up. Or if they do, they're quickly thrown out. Not just, I know you think the people throw them out, life throws them out. But the man's up there and he is telling you, you paid your $200 or $300 or $500 for the seminar, and he's telling you how to make money, how to invest, how to do this and how to do that. No one ever stands up. That is, no one within the mainstream of life's body stands up and says, I did a little checking on you before you came down here, and I found out that you live over in the housing projects out in East St. Louis, and that you couldn't even keep up your car payments. Now, I enjoyed everything you said, and I know your book, it helped me a lot, but now something's wrong. I'm going to have to discount all this because I found out you ain't rich. So I ain't taking your advice. Now, you laugh, and you can go, well, that's true. You know, physician, rich thyself. That is not what civilization is about. There's nothing wrong. But the more you are removed, the more you're civilized, the more that you're an expert, the more that you are a true proponent, a happy warrior on the team of the secondary world of intellectual civilization, the more you get moved away from the original huddle. The original huddle being the primary affairs. And so the more you're an expert on economy, the less there is that you're an expert economist. I can put it all kinds of ways. Surely you get a glimpse of it. The less need, the more you're an expert, remember, the more you're civilized and an expert in the field of economics, the less need at all there is for you to be rich, for anyone to worry about whether you're rich, for you to think about being rich. It becomes, and the more you're an expert, the further you're removed from it. The further you would, if it was you personally, the less you would think about it. That if somebody did accidentally, or your wife or your husband went, you realize now you've got 14 PhDs from all the leading universities in the Western world in economics. Yes, I guess I know that. And they invite you everywhere. Yes, yes, yes. And they've even disqualified you from a further Nobel Prize. Yes, yes, yes. Would you look around? How come that we can't live any better than we live? Back when he had his first PhD and he was just getting started, that kind of thing might have had some effect on him. He might have had to defend himself. Or he might have gone away and thought, that is weird. If I know so much, as they used to say in the University of East Mississippi, if I know so much, how come I ain't rich? But the more you're an expert, that is, the more you're civilized, the less that has any, when I say effect, it's not psychological. It's not that the man has now become so steely and flinty about being attacked, he no longer cares, like everybody laughing at the weatherman. He figures, I don't care. It's not that. It's not psychological. It is you become more and more. If we could graduate, if we consider it to be quantum steps of expertise, remember, which is synonymous with being civilized in any area, the more someone becomes expert. And one time, this does not have to be someone with degrees or recognized. It's up here. That is, the more you look to some aspect of your own neural system. One place where the lightning hits your glue. One place where Mary says, bah. To you, you're an expert, and the more you're an expert, that is, the more you listen to your own conclusions. As opposed to that man tonight that Kyroots mentioned, that every time somebody was about to come to a conclusion, he'd leave. Now, some of you laughed, and I don't know whether you understood one of the levels of that story. That when every time somebody was about to come to a conclusion, this one guy'd leave. ... parentheses. And he said it was a lucky thing that his mind didn't take it personally. That was about it. Do I have to drag it out? Do you get any idea? Well, I will then. Would you consider when it said, he said it was a lucky thing his mind didn't take it personally, that the non-parenthetical, the opening part of that Kyroots, that all that was just in his brain to begin with, you understand? That whenever someone was about to come to some conclusion, this one guy'd leave. But we're not talking about out in a room or out in a crowd of people. This one guy'd leave. And he said it was a good thing that, all right, and he said it was a lucky thing that the rest of his brain didn't take it personally. How about that? The more you're an expert, not just out there, but to yourself, that there are conclusions. That is, you know what to think and you know what to believe. How do you know it? Well, I just know it. Well, you know it because it is a collective belief or thought somewhere. And most likely in this damn vicinity, since most of you are here, that yes, well, it just so happens that a large number of people are right thinkers and they do believe the right thing. I'm glad to be around some decent intellectual feathers so that we can all flock together. Right. The more you're an expert, remember that all expertise, all civilization, the secondary world, all arises from what we've called the primary world. That is no longer of operational value, but that which would be just a Homo sapiens sans the intellect working and talking, just to stay alive, just as a crude, illiterate, non-verbal, non-thinking biped on this planet. All that would be the primary world if we could separate it, but we're doing it verbally. We're doing it as a mapping survey. Everything that keeps that creature alive is the basis of everything that we do. You got no choice. You just can't make up anything. Everything we do, everything you do in the civilized world in 3 dimensions can be traced to screwing, eating, or getting out of the rain. That's it. Everything else is just some version of that. Everything from automobiles to art, everything. The more you are civilized, not just out there, but in here, the more you are an expert, not just out there, but in here, the more you can come to some conclusions, not just out there, but in here, then it is as though you are moving, wherever you were, it doesn't matter, but it's like every time you become a little more expert in some area, it is like you have been one more step removed from where the origins of this was in the primary world, which is not bad now. I'm not too inclined to go back because I point out from all kinds of ways this continuing dream of the noble savage and people believing that the best is behind us. It's always that kind of basis. But you can't go back, and if you could go back, you sure would be sorry, and etc. Suffice to say, you can't go back. You don't know how. You can't go back in the 3D world. If you went back in the 3D world, the best you'd find would be a 2D world. And boy, would you be mad then. You'd say, hey, why'd you let me do that? I'm worse off than I was before I started. And then you'd force me to have to say, I didn't tell you so, so don't do that. To be an expert, to be civilized, part of the process, to become more and more conclusive in your own thinking, now at the ordinary level we're talking about, then it removes you more and more. The more you're an economist, the more you're an expert economist, the less there is any sort of operational validity, any operational nexus between you, that is your expertise in being an economist, and your own personal financial situation. The more you're an expert priest, the more that you are considered to be an expert priest. Not only an expert priest, but on the side you have written books on marriage counseling and the sexual moralities of a 20th century Catholic. The more you're an expert, the less anyone ever says, I read your book, it changed my whole life, but just tell me the truth, Father. Did you ever get any? Did you ever screw before you went to... Nobody. The more you're an expert, and he never thinks about it. But it's less and less. Do you understand? It is like diverging interest. That the primary world's got an interest of keeping man at this absolute, tangible, basic level alive, which you got to. You got to be that sane. But then the more you become expert, it's not insane, since I'm doing the thing, but it's this process I'm trying to get you to see. It's like a removal. That it takes you one step away. Every time you become a little more expert, whatever the area is, which is always traceable to one of the primary aspects of life, you're one step further removed from it. Think about it. Remember, there's nothing wrong out there, but a revolution should consider that the more you're an expert, in a sense, and there's some old cheap, whoever it was, I say cheap, I can't give credit to whoever says that an expert is someone who knows more and more about less and less, which is a 20th century version of something. But at any rate, that's pretty easy to say, and people keep repeating it. And they go, ha, ha, ha. It is a cliche, as that poor old park philosopher pointed out. It got to be almost, I think he was even afraid up to the point of a catch-25, that if you are going to be a public thinker, and your words are repeated enough, cherished enough, people are impressed enough that your words become cliches, then you got a good, strange, as always, situation that now you're famous for these great ideas that become cliches. Now you're famous, except what you said's become worthless. There is a way from a revolutionist view, from a subversive view, not the ordinary view, but the more you're becoming an expert in something, the more you're becoming conclusive to yourself, the more that you accept. Well, now, yes, I know that. Yes, yes, yes. The further removed you are from the original, the further you're away from the cesspool's not the word, is it? Reading pool of your not neurotic, neural, I'll get it, the breeding pool of your neural genetics. That's it. That other one was that was going to be too insulting. I just couldn't finish that. I'm glad I caught myself. And he said he was too. Now, besides what we're talking about the religious aspect, back to, can you see, how about a more intellectual view, which is not quite as easy or maybe as entertaining to describe, but if we took the same sort of thing I was talking about religion, become an expert in the intellectual area, which, of course, I was a little bit talking about the economist as opposed to a priest giving sex education, is an economist giving financial advice, and you find out he's in bankruptcy. There's another aspect of the intellectual side. Well, it's true of both, but the intellectual side is, maybe will bring this more into focus. As you become expert, that is, you become civilized in more of an intellectual way. That is, that you are part of the collective efforts of men to think of that which an individual can, as opposed to the religious aspect over here, wherein men collectively get together and believe that which one man cannot. In the intellectual sense, becoming an expert not only seems to the collective efforts of the men, a group of men, not only seems to reveal new information, it in fact begins to create apparently new worlds from which additional new information can arise. All right. Taken metaphorically, speaking, if we did, about a secondary intellectual Columbus. Now, he not only discovered new worlds, new neural worlds, but he also created them. He had contemporaries who had seen so-called maps of these new worlds, but only Columbus took up sailing. When the mind goes more and more into a secondary area, I understand that people think that they are discovering, in the scientific sense, new laws, that they are discovering new intellectual areas. Now, they may be represented by some new observation in the expert field of cosmology, or down at the other end, in the field of subatomic physics, that they are making new discoveries. It is not just making new discoveries, and it is the continual creation of new intellectual worlds. It's good to always save the nice, easy one right for the last few minutes, isn't it? Now let me try, really, one more time. Consider a neural, secondary, an intellectual, a metaphorical Columbus. There's no doubt he sailed, well, just taking ordinary history. He sailed, he said, there's new worlds over here, and don't bother me with the history that he didn't really believe that and all that. Let's take the good old grammar school version, elementary school. He sailed and he discovered new worlds. You simultaneously invent the new worlds. That's hard, and it's tricky to use Columbus because he actually, if we're going to stick with that kind of metaphor, as opposed to symbolism, the actual metaphor that he did go over there and he discovered, here it is, actual dirt, rocks, coastline, condos, brand new worlds. But that which it represents, the basis of it, the civilized, invisible, intellectual basis of all civilization, was not that. He as much created it as discovered it. What is the world of economics? You want to go back to that? They teach economics. I know some of you are going to find this hard. They have textbooks. You know, they charge $20 and $25, and they're guys who got degrees. And they teach. They're probably pushing enough now that they sometimes call it the science, the discipline of economics. And you could take a real quick, cheap shot if you want to and say, well, now that's even more ridiculous from an intellectual, sophisticated viewpoint than it is religion. I find that even funnier, could say some cosmopolitan-minded folk. I find an economist standing there with an expensive suit and a degree on the wall and speaking in forcible, authoritative manners. I find that personally funnier than I do to see a guy walking around in a dress, never gets any sex, waving around funny things and holding, got hats that go in all kinds of directions, make Carmen Miranda look like an underdresser. I used to think that was funny, could say some ordinary people. And they'll say, but that ain't funny. That ain't funny. I'm going to tell you what's funny is a guy dressed up and they say, here he is, Dr. So-and-so, and you find out, Dr. My ass, he can't even give you a prescription for codeine. Turns out he ain't a real doctor. He's a doctor of, can you believe this? Economics. And he's staying up there dressed up. I'm talking about nice clothes, nails done, hair, and he is an expert. Do you follow? You can laugh at that. Because in one sense, there is no such thing, in one sense, as the field of economics. Men invented it. Now, they didn't invent it from scratch. Because eating, saving up something to eat tomorrow, or swapping with your neighbor in the next cave for something that he has to eat that you don't have, there's the basis, of course, staying alive. But if you start removing yourself and becoming civilized, we're not talking about downhill, things are not going awry. We're talking about things progressing in the 3D sense. Then you become more and more removed from the origins of it. And so in one sense, you understand the human mind, its job is to invent. But in one sense, it removes itself further and further from that, going in this direction. So in one sense, there is no such thing as psychology, as religion, as economics. It's an absolute invention, but that's not an attack, because I start pointing out to you that civilization is all mental. There is no such thing as economics. There is no such thing as physics. I mean, you can't go find it. Don't point out to me MIT's fine new building. Don't point out to me Harvard's endowment. Don't point out to me the bank where the endowment lays or lies. It is all here. There is no such thing as economics. There is no such thing as religion. It's invented. That which passes for discovery, we're out. I'll have to pick it up next time. But that which passes for discovery, which it is. We're not faulting that. That which is discoveries from math to new religious ideas, to new breakthroughs in psychology, new observations statistically done on large groups having to do with sociology. Discoveries. I know. But it is as much an invention. If the discovery is going to get legs, whatever the new discovery is, somebody's new book, if it's going to fly for a while and become part of the curriculum, part of the general thinking in that area of math, physics, religion, if it's going to have some life, then it was as much an invention as it was a discovery. Okay. If you say I'm finished, I'm finished. Who am I to say otherwise? If you could get the Ventures to play Wipeout now, it would be all right.